Okay, so we're delighted this week to welcome Martin Hoare to the podcast. Martin is the winner of the Irish Life Dublin Marathon 2022 and a member of Celebrate JSE. Welcome to the podcast, Martin.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be here.
Yeah,
Martin,
absolutely
I was
great.
talking to Brian earlier and I said there's a couple of things that we actually have in common, and that's right, three of us are runners, three of us have currently two kids, all right, three of us work full time, but the only difference is one of us is a national champion, so I let people guess which person's a national champion by the end next half an hour of this conversation, but it's going to be a tough one.
Well, you can be a national champion in a lot of things. So
Well,
I don't know what your skills are, but let's wait and see, right? You might pop something out for us.
That's it, exactly. So I think, right, Martin, obviously, I think there's only one place to start with this whole conversation, and that is the Irish Life Dublin Marathon 2022. Now, before we get to the race and everything like that, which I've no doubt was, and I've heard you say this before, was very much unexpected. You went in there with no expectations and stuff like that. How was the build up to the Dublin Marathon for you? How did the training go? Getting your fuel right, everything like that, go for you we'd say take it 12 weeks before, from 12 week and onwards.
Well, maybe I might step back a little further,
okay,
if that's okay. So I guess I ran Rotterdam April last year, and I was actually in really, really good shape. I kind of thought I was actually, I've been talking for years, I was a sub 220 guy. I always said I was a 218, 219 guy. And I thought I would have done it then, but I ran 220:30. So I was coming off a back of a good spring marathon, basically, and just went into the summer, ran a few races. So Dunshaughlin, Coca's 5K, a few races like that in and around the locality, and just kept myself, got a bit of speed during the summer. But kind of in and around the August, in and around this time, July, August, I started getting a bit flat, and probably just that long period of probably 8 months of just training hard was kind of hitting in on me. And we took a little bit of time down, and we pulled back. So now we're talking about 12 to 16, about 16 weeks out, I'd say, nearly at this stage. And kind of we had a chat about it, and look, we just said, look, let's stay focused. We're working towards Dublin. Dublin was a goal, not for time. It was more just to race it. It was probably one race I wanted to just go in and just completely just say, look, I'm just here to see what the championship race is and go for it. And the aim from like even on the start line was always Masters 35. That's what it was. It was kind of thinking about who else is M35 and up, and see if I can get a national medal at a Masters. So that was where it was. And like, it was just kind of thinking about that the entire time.
You're lucky, Martin, I wasn't there, because I would have been in the over 35 category myself last year. So you're lucky. I wasn't there.
I ticked your name off. Actually, I had a list of names. I was ticking them all off, right? But no. So 16 weeks out, I think there was two big things happened, right? So I ran a race in Phoenix Park. It could have been the Frank Duffy, I think. And like, I came third or fourth, but the time was nothing special. But I felt I was actually very, very weak when it came to the hills. I hit those hills, and the guys with me were just putting 10 meters on me handy, and I was going backwards. So kind of I came away from it, and I said, look, I need to do two things. I need to race every race there is in the park. I always think Phoenix Park is like Dublin Marathon. You have hills, you have flats, you have up, you have down, you have wind, you have everything kind of thrown at you in the park. And I kind of said, look, I'm going to race as much as I can. So I did the national 10 mile, I ended up doing the half marathon there. Whatever like those long distance races in the park did, they really brought me on and kind of brought me on throughout the training period. That was one. And then the other one was we actually started incorporating a lot of hills into kind of my weekly mileage, and brought that strength on. So the way we kind of looked at it is Rotterdam's a flat marathon. We possibly didn't need as much hill work going into that. It was more about actually getting into the groove and getting that speed in. While when it came to Dublin, you actually need that strength, I think, and I think that kind of actually paid a lot of dividends. Brought my fitness on quite a lot.
Especially in the latter stages as well. Sorry, I forgot. It's kind of the latter stages when you're obviously getting fatigued, and you know these sneaky little hills that one up the ramp up into, what is it, mile
9, is it 8 or 9?
And then the Milltown one I'd completely forgotten about, and I was going up that, and I was like, oh my god. I saw my brother at it, and literally, if he hadn't taken my mind off it, I was kind of thinking, what is happening here? But yeah, no, there's for anyone that's done Dublin, they'll know about them, but there are a few sneaky hills, probably in difficult places. So it's a fair course, it's a challenging course. Yeah, it's a good one.
But just on the point you made there, Martin, and I know in particular over the last week or two, we've got a lot of new listeners to the podcast, and in particular those that are aiming for Dublin. Would you strongly advise people to race those races? I know the Irish Life series goes out there, and as you said, the Frank Duffy 10 miler. And would you put that as a kind of a major tip for people listening in to do those races?
I really would, actually. So, obviously, look, for anyone that's been around for a while, they know those races. You can't discount the actual advantage you'll get from actually that strength work and actually being in that race situation. For anyone that's basically new to marathon running, like you all know it, right? So it's you start at the 5 mile in Corky and you go 10k, 10 mile, half marathon. That's all building you through the summer and through your training block. So yeah, it's invaluable. I think they're great races. I did pretty much them all last year. I've done Corky this year. And I think they're really well run, really well organized, and they do bring your fitness on quite a lot. So yeah, 100%, I'd be behind that.
And racing helps you anyway. I think it just, you can do all the training in the world, but actually getting into a race and racing the person next to you, and going, right, I need to push myself to that limit. You never do it in training, so it just gives you that little bit. And I know you will talk about it later on with the race, where you had to get into that mindset as well, and things like that, where right, it's going to hurt, and we need to get used to that hurt beforehand.
Yeah, it does, right? So I don't think anything can replicate or kind of copy that sort of feeling, being if you're in a 10 mile race, being at 6 miles and being absolutely off your feet and going, I have 4 more to go and I can't ease off here. At 9 miles it's easy because you have a mile to go and you just pump the arms and get there. But with 4 miles to go, you have a long way. So yeah, there's nothing that can replicate it. Definitely racing brings on your training, brings on your overall everything. Obviously you have to be careful not to overtrain or over race. That's one thing, but definitely racing has to be a cornerstone of kind of pretty much all build-ups to any marathon, I'd say.
And when you went away then and you examined, as you said, you worked on your racing in the park and then you worked on your hill work, I suppose, how long did that take you to come back and realize, okay, I've ticked those boxes as well. I know I'm X amount of weeks out and I'm still in a good place.
It actually came quite late. So I did, I thought I was going okay. And then I ran the half marathon in the park, and I was, I probably shouldn't say this. I was completely off my feet. There was something not right. I was tired. I ran the race, and I didn't really run that great. And I remember Jim Ockley came up to me at the finish line and said, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm fine, actually." I didn't feel too bad. And I only got home, went straight to bed, got up, took a COVID test, and I had COVID.
Okay.
So I literally so I kind of thought I was going well into that race, and then all of a sudden it fell apart. So that knocked me back. I probably 10 days off, probably blessing in disguise, really. But I had 10 days off then, about 5 weeks out from the marathon. So once I recovered from that, thankfully I recovered quite quickly. I had probably 3 weeks before Dublin just to actually put in good training. So I didn't really know where I was before the race. I knew I was fit, I knew I was strong, but I didn't really think I was as fit or as strong as it turned out, I suppose.
You mentioned,
Sorry, go on, Brian. No, great.
No, I just said you mentioned the word there. We were with COVID, and obviously this was the first one.
Is it
back.
banned? Is it?
Well,
I'm happy to disregard.
It was the first one back, obviously after the COVID break, and that probably thrown a lot of people out as well. And people hadn't really raced marathon for so long as well. So obviously that was another factor too.
It was hugely special. I've ran, I think that was my 4th Dublin, and that was obviously, look, we can talk about it, but when you're leading a race like that, I'd never experienced that. I'd never experienced Dublin or to be in that situation. But just talking to everyone, like the atmosphere I've never experienced. Like I've done nearly probably 20 marathons around the world, and I've done some of the biggest ones, and I don't think I've ever seen crowds like that and kind of support. And I think there's a couple, like obviously Dublin is the friendly marathon, but I think people were just actually delighted to see the Dublin Marathon back on that October weekend, and just delighted to see back some normality coming back and actually tradition. So I think it was great.
Yeah, and a nice one then to go away and get to obviously the experience and win it even better. Like, you know, and again, I come back to I was listening to one of your interviews that you've done, and it was just like, you know, you're there, you're working up the pack, or you're the third bike person with you, and then you move up to the second bike next to you, and then the first bike next to you. And these are experiences that none of us will ever probably have in our life, you know what I mean? And like, you got to live that for that 2 hours and 20 minutes, and you know, to come away then at the end as a national champion is just, you know, reward for the work you've put in with it. Now, your coach, Brendan Hackett, he obviously has a massive influence on you. He's like yourself, a GA man. You know, well, you're now, I would presume, a retired GA man.
They kicked me out long ago. Don't worry.
Yeah, so he had a massive influence on you, and it obviously played a massive part in you winning that as well.
Yeah. So I started with Brendan. I was introduced to Brendan by 2017. And I trained under him. He said he'd take me on. He'd know athletes in athletics. He was only GAA at the time, and actually GAA for about 5 years. But he basically took me on. I had a great 10 weeks, and then I got 2 or 3 stress fractures in a row, and I was basically injured for 18 months. And I went through 18 months of thinking this lad's going to drop me as his only athletic guy. What's the point? But no, he stuck with me, thank God. And yeah, like he's massive, right? So he keeps me accountable. So a number of people will talk about kind of self-coaching and everything else. I can kind of decide what, or I can have like about 90% know what I'm supposed to do. But then, like every other runner, 10%, I'll just do another 5 miles. Why not? And I always overcook myself quite a lot. So he keeps me grounded, and he actually reduces me or pulls me back quite a lot. So that's one thing. So on the training side, but I probably his best or his biggest influence really is around the kind of sports psychology and kind of getting in my head a bit. So whether it's a few weeks out from races or actually going into marathons, and thinking about things in the race, before the race, and everything else. It's massive. Like he just has a way of instilling confidence, I suppose, in everything you do, right? So I would naturally be someone that would be thinking about a race and saying, I've missed 2 weeks of training. I had COVID. You know, I'm not in good shape here, and I actually would have probably talked myself down quite a lot in my own head. And he actually, I remember him taking me aside. He said, "Look, you've a massive bank. You did a great race in Rotterdam." And actually, he talked me up, so I couldn't wait to get out. I nearly felt like I had to prove something. So he changes the focus, the mentality quite a lot, and it's huge, right? So for anyone out there, like I'd always recommend now, like having been probably self-coached myself or popped around with club coaches. When I started taking it seriously, like having a coach and having someone that you're obviously friendly with, but you're accountable to is huge.
Yeah, and is he hands-on with you then, Martin, as well? As in, would he turn up to your sessions or long runs, or is it kind of, you know, is it very much constant contact?
I could talk to Brendan every day, and I could talk to him once a week. It just depends. I guess he wouldn't come to sessions, and the only reason for that is, look, I have a young family. I have a job in Dublin, so I have a 3-hour commute, kind of when I have to go into the office, an hour and a half each way, and I'm in town 4 days a week now. So there's quite a lot around that. So I'm always trying to balance kind of where I can do training, what I can do, and where. So like he'll come down if I'm doing a hard long run before a marathon. He'll come down and give me the bottles, and he'll more than happy from that. Or if I'm doing a time trial in COVID, he came down and cycled ahead of me or whatever. I remember that, but he wouldn't necessarily always be there hands on. He kind of trusts me to
You deliver, yeah.
Well, sometimes he trusts me to do what he does plus 10%. I think that's the unwritten rule with him. So he talks down the sessions, and I kind of add another premium. But
I think every athlete would do that, don't they? And it's always like you try to push the limit ever so slightly every week, and then you realize, oh shoots, I overcooked that one ever so slightly.
Yeah. When you're doing an extra 10 reps or something, you know you're gone wrong, right? But no, so I guess so in the run up to Dublin, we talked an awful lot about a number of things. So like the focus, obviously, as I said, was the Masters, and that's what we were looking towards. But like Brendan, it was funny. He actually went on holidays the week of the marathon, the week of Dublin, so he wasn't even in the country. And I remember going two conversations stand out. One was we had a conversation about 3 days before the marathon. He was flying out, and I was in his house, and he just said, "Look, you're in great shape. Like you've done the training. Just look, you've written it all down. We're looking at the diary basically, or the Strava." And he said, "Look at what you've done. You're in great nick. Like your times are good. Like whatever happens on Sunday, like it'll happen. You'll be able for it. So if someone goes, just go with them. Don't limit yourself. Don't talk yourself down. You're as good as anyone in that race. You
just
might
trust
run
yourself,
2:15.
really.
Yeah, you might run 2:15. You might run 2:25. You might come first or you might come last. It doesn't like you can do whatever, and it'll all play out for yourself. So just, as you said, trust yourself." So that was the first one. And then the second one I remember, and I'll actually talk about it. It was funny, but it was the first time in Dublin. I was lucky. I got asked. Eugene Coppinger asked or invited me to be part of the elite group for Dublin. First time I was ever in it. I've been in the kind of fast club runners or the fast start at the top of the race, but never in the kind of the more elite side of it. And I think it was largely because of some of my results earlier on in the year. So I got invited to go to the pre-race briefing. So I've never been to that before. I was never in one of those in Dublin anyway. I've been to smaller races maybe, but not really kind of this scale. And it was just so interesting. So like walked into the room, there's about 40 athletes. Half of them are non-Irish. They're kind of, you had a few Kenyans, I guess, and a few Eastern European females across. But Eugene's kind of talking everyone through kind of what to expect in the race, what to do, and do with your drinks, what to do, where you have to go, what you have to be in. Like basically an hour on the Saturday, in Balls Bridge, basically in the hotel in Balls Bridge, beside the expo, talked us through everything that was going to happen. I'd never been, so the first thing I did was I arrived late. Didn't know where I was going. So I rocked in and looked around me and found a seat right up the front. And I was just looking around, and I was nearly thinking, like, I was kind of looking at all the past winners. So you'd Mick, and you'd Sean Hare, like Gary O'Hanlon and Serge. Like there was so many, and the Clonmel contingent there as well. So it was just really, I thought it was really special. Like I just really enjoyed it. I just enjoyed being in, saying, God, I'm actually part of this group for once. I've never been here, and maybe I won't be again, but this year I am. But I got caught out though, so they told me I had to have my bottles and my drinks. I was thinking I could get my family to give me my drinks and everything on course, and then Eugene dropped the bombshell that we weren't allowed. We had to take it off the tables, and anyone taking it off a spectator in the race was disqualified. So. Panic stations, running into the expo, trying to buy gels, to sellotape to water bottles to give to him the night before the race and everything else. And then he was talking about it was funny, he was talking about drug testing. Then he's like, there'll be drug testing at the finish line. On the way home, I was talking to Brendan. I said, Brendan, they're going drug testing. I've never been in a race that there's actually going to be proper drug tests and protocol or whatever. And I was laughing at him. I remember he said, "Don't worry about it. You won't be near the front, so don't panic yourself about that." I said, "Oh, well, that's fair enough." And then I ended up being drug tested and everything. So,
yeah, because I remember,
which was another experience.
Yeah, I remember when Aoife won the marathon. I went back to the team hotel after, or the hotel afterwards, where she was drug tested. We were all waiting outside, and she was in there so long, she was so dehydrated. Still, she was waiting. She like she's trying to drink water, and you get a text message, still waiting. You're like, come on. It's not as glamorous as everyone thinks this life is at times. Like,
yeah, no. I actually just, I was on a really high. I can talk about it, but like they were talking, they explained everything. They asked me, it was my first time. It was, and they went through all the. I think everyone will remember probably Michelle de Bruyne at the time, like the A and the B sample and what it's for and what the protocol around opening it and closing it and all this sort of stuff. So like I'd say I spent double the time as most other athletes because I was just asking so many questions about what's this and what's that, and but no, they were really nice, which is good. I learned a lot, so it might be a new profession for me. Maybe, you never know.
And Martin, just on that subject, I suppose, like, had you prepared in the build-up with certain gels and your fueling on the day, and did, like, one, what was it, I suppose, in some ways, and two, did it change because of that, or did you still follow the same plan?
No, I still followed the same plan. So I was able to. Lucky Kevin English was in the expo, so I was able to pop in and grab. So I used Morton. So I've gotten used to using the Morton gels, and the Morton sachets. So that's just what works for me. I probably have a good enough stomach from just probably constant practice with it. So I practice quite a lot in long runs, kind of gels and everything else, because I possibly, like, I view them as kind of, when you're taking those gels on hard runs, it's actually starting the repair process a lot earlier. So kind of that's the way I kind of talk to myself about it. So yeah, so Morton, I was quite lucky. So he had a load spare, and I was able to just grab them and
I'll fix you up later on.
Run back to Eugene before he disappeared. Nice.
It's incredible, and that the Irish Life Marathon champion turns out to be, like, someone who hadn't got that the night before. You're normal.
And just for people, Martin, just for people who obviously, like, look, I remember going through gels, and I went through gels every marathon nearly, something, because all of a sudden something wouldn't work for me. Like, did you go through that process? You've done, as you said, about 20 marathons. Have you? And Martin's not that old of a product. It's only around the last few years. Like, have you had to try different gels and figure out exactly, right, this actually works for me?
No, look, I'm probably, I have a strong stomach. I can stomach a lot of things in those marathons as long as I don't get too dehydrated. That's probably the one thing I'd see now. Like, if I get dehydrated, I won't be able to handle it. But if I'm getting in enough water and I'm kind of hydrated starting the race, generally won't really, once it's not something sickly like sweet, and the Morton is quite plain. There's not really much taste of it. So yeah, that's just what works, and it's probably one of the higher concentration of carbs out there as well. So I think that was all I was thinking about. I was like, what's the highest carb I can take, and how much can I get in an hour? That's basically all.
And then, just for, again, people listening in, give us a rough guide of what your fuel intake would have been that last week, and your water intake, as you sip water there now. But in
the purposely Morton bottle, very articulate.
They're handy bottles to have. Like, I guess over the years, so I used to be someone that would do the carb load quite heavily. Someone that kind of, you'd be starting on the Wednesday and you'd be eating the house and the kitchen out of it. But no, I've changed quite a lot, actually. So I guess now, I actually was with a nutritionist back in for a number of years, from 2014, a guy called Marcus Shortle, who was excellent. And we worked on a lot of nutrition, kind of, and how to fuel pre and everything. And what I found out was, or what worked for me anyway, is that, like, the carb load actually only starts on the Saturday. So I'll eat normal until the Saturday morning. Now, I'm just going to caveat before everyone just runs off and does this. This is what works for me. I've practiced it. So you do what kind of works for you. And if you want to practice it, do it ahead of a 10 mile or a half marathon. If you want to change something like this, you don't want to see a marathon go wrong. But so I'll start on the Saturday morning. I say Sunday race, I'll start on the Saturday morning, and I'll do maybe 8 hours. And I won't just be constantly eating. I'll eat probably 3 heavy meals of carbs on the Saturday, and I'll cut off around 7 o'clock, and that'll be pretty much me done. So that's literally it. So not a huge amount to what some people are just taking on days and days of carbs and pastas. But I think with 8 hours, I get enough in. And then obviously you have your porridge and everything else the morning of.
And the morning of, so yours is, again, just because I do find this very interesting, especially with the kind of the elite side and see, like, so are you porridge, cup of coffee, you know, bagel, or?
Yeah, no coffee. Doesn't do that well in the morning. Whatever, like, whatever carb is there. So ideally it's porridge, probably toast and peanut butter, and look, on the way to the race you'll probably have a carb bar or something just to top up. But if you're abroad and you're at a race abroad, sometimes you can't get it, sometimes something happens, you bring the porridge but you forget the milk or whatever. It's always something. So whatever carb you can get. So if it's just bread, that's fine. So, like, you'll work with it on the morning. You should have enough in you.
Just on that subject, though, and you kind of brought it up in two ways there. I'm guessing you left from your own house, you slept in your own bed the night before Dublin. Like, the preparation must have been, get up in your own kitchen, make your own breakfast, as opposed to doing a marathon abroad.
Yeah, it was funny. My cousin, he lives in the UK. It was his first ever marathon, and he decided he'd do Dublin. So he was in my house. So I was showing him the course the day before, the night before, and actually that took a bit of the chill out of it, because I was actually just talking to someone who was doing their first ever marathon, and just actually explaining what the start going to be like, what to expect and when to expect it, what fuel to be taking, everything. So, like, that was really it. Like, we basically talked around that for maybe an hour that night or that night, and when he got up the next morning, like, I was more kind of concentrating on him and make sure he was fueling and everything else. I think we went for a walk around 5:30 in the morning just to wake the legs up, and basically back, and then kind of last bits of prep and then out the door. So I think that kind of took the nerves out of it, so that I had something else to focus on. And I brought him to the start line and kind of set him up before I kind of went off my way. So so that's basically what I was doing. And then I have obviously my wife Eileen, kind of a massive support for me. Like, she was running around, kind of had everything sorted, and then the two boys they knew I was excited, so they were excited. And, like, you guys have young kids as well. You know what it's like kind of when you're talking to a 5 and a 2-year-old at 6:30. You're trying to get out the door, but all they want to do is play. So it's kind of a balancing act as well,
right? Just to give us on the build up, and we're going to go to the race, I think, after this next. On the build up, I could take a typical week. We say, not obviously in one of your main weeks. What would a main week look like for you? And I know, take this into this, which I think is fascinating. The fact that I know I've read this a few times, that you race a train pretty much to work 3 days a week. And I know you're probably sick of hearing that, but it did make me laugh when I heard it.
Irish Life or Irish Rail, they sometimes I beat it, but anyway. No, so look, I'm in office, so I work in Ballsbridge, and it's about 14 miles from my home. So let's say 2 days a week. So you start off your Monday, I might just run home, and it's an easy run. Podcast, listening to yourselves probably on the way home for an hour and a half, and that's really what it is. It's an hour 40, I'd say, just to jog home. And then Tuesday, probably something light again, maybe 10 miles, right? So just light enough. Some people do a number of sessions. Like, I'm no spring chicken, so like I'll do 2. I generally do it on a Wednesday and on a Saturday. So the Wednesday could be anything from an interval session, like 4x2 mile, 6x1 mile, 10k interval or 1k intervals, something like that, or kind of, you might think about doing something longer, like a half marathon session. So just depending on where you are in your cycle. So that's kind of, Wednesday's hard. You're kind of gearing up for Wednesday, and I need to make sure I'm working from home that day so I can kind of bounce things around. Then look, Thursday, Friday, again, it's whatever you can do, right? So it could be a 10-mile easy, or it could be a run home or run into work. Like tomorrow morning, I'm running to work. I'm in town tomorrow night, so for something after work. So I have to run into work, and that's fine. That works perfect. So then that's Friday. Saturday, then again, you're looking at kind of like whatever it is. So like whatever you did on the Wednesday, if it was a shorter interval session, a 10K style session of Ks or a mix of 800s and 400s or whatever that is, then you might do your half marathon longer session on the Saturday. And that could be anything from, you might do 2 by 5 mile, or you could do 3 by 5K or something longer that you're working on that like aerobic base, or anaerobic or aerobic base. And then the Sunday is just your long run, right? So the traditional, what everyone has. But as I went along in the Dublin cycle, that started incorporating more and more hills.
So sorry, no, because just your long run is it there. You don't have a technical marathon specific long run. You know, where some people would do 12 miles, 15 miles of a marathon session. Yours is more 2 sessions and time on your feet on the Sunday, is it?
No. So maybe just clarify, right? So I would have, in a build up for a marathon, I'll probably do a four marathon efforts, like long runs.
Okay.
And that can be anything. So I think the longest I've ever gotten up to is about 16 miles at marathon pace. And that's like you'd be fairly wiped after that, 16, 17. Like, because you're doing 3 miles maybe before, 3 miles after, or whatever. So you're hitting 23, 24 miles probably in total. But like it could be anything. It could be, I know in the run up to Rotterdam this year, we felt we hadn't done enough of them, and we ended up doing something. Again, I'm not going to advise anyone to do this, but we did back-to-back long runs on a Saturday and a Sunday. I did basically 16 miles on the Saturday with 10 miles at marathon pace, and then we did the same again, but 12 miles on the Sunday.
Oof, okay.
And the idea was basically we wanted to get a bank of marathon pace in, but we didn't want to do 20 miles of it in one day, because that would take out an awful lot out of your body. So we said if we separate it and do it over 2 days, basically the recovery actually might be a lot better.
Yeah.
So that was the
and you're going into the Sunday with tired legs, which kind of then stimulates the last 6 miles of a marathon when you are tired anyway.
And just on that, and again we touched on this already too, but again I'm just conscious of people listening in and getting tips here. But like, would those runs have been done with full fueling strategy that you were using for race day?
Yeah, full fuel, full your shoes, like everything, like bottles out, like all of. So I'm quite lucky. I live beside the Grand Canal, so like depending on which way I want to do it, I'll always get a straight surface for like 5 miles if I want it. So some days you have to play with the wind. So just you have to decide which way you need to go. But no, like that's what you like. I'm quite lucky that like you have 5 miles there without cars and basically a few dogs. But apart from that, you kind of scare a few people when you're clipping along in around 5:15 pace, and they're kind of out for their Sunday coffee. But anyway,
is there a favorite session or a go-to session maybe that is your Bible, I suppose?
Let me think. Yeah, but it's probably one of the easier sessions. I actually really love doing. So let's say my marathon pace at 5:15 pace. So that's what roughly it is, or 5:20, 5:15, 5:20. I really enjoy doing 10 to 12 miles at 6-minute pace. It's not too hard, but it's not too easy. So you have to concentrate to make sure you're clipping along, but you're not mincing yourself, because you're 45 seconds slower than your marathon effort. And I actually think that brings your aerobic base up quite substantially, something like that. So that mid pace, mid tempo, some people say, oh, it's taking too much out of you without hitting the extremes. I just feel actually it boosts you quite a lot. Your efficiency. So that's one that I actually really love. And I have a 12-mile loop that, like, if I leave my house, I can do it in about an hour 25 and be back. So an extended lunch or whatever if I need it on a day, and then I'm back. And actually, that's probably it.
And the last question, I think, on your training, your recovery runs. So this always again fascinates me with different people. What's your recovery run pace roughly? I know it slightly changes. Is it 7-minute miling? Is it 7:30s, or is it just depending how you feel on the day?
I'd say it's how I feel on the day, but it always ends up being about 6:50, 7 minutes. So that's probably what I hit. I have a good friend, Lee Van Haften. He actually is in Dunor Harriers. He knows his running inside out. He'll always tell me I do them too quick. And he'll always be a little word in my ear to kind of slow them down with it. And I've listened to him. I have, and it paid dividends because I used to do them a little quicker than that. But I generally in about 7 minutes, right? So I'd say some days it could be 7:10, some days 6:50. I think today I ran 6:50s. So I'm not necessarily looking at the watch, but I'm just kind of tipping along.
You're going off, but that is a massive marathon pace. That is still, not far off a minute 50 seconds off what your marathon pace is. You know what I mean? So I think a lot of people do run their recovery runs, and that's why I ask it way too fast. Like, I would run mine, and I'm not fit now, but I would still run them around 8 odd minute miling, and I have done a lot faster obviously than that, but it's just recovery's time on your feet, and it's just giving yourself time to actually recover.
It's probably something. It's probably one of the negative impacts of Strava. To be fair, people thinking that, I remember someone told me that I was kind of talking about racing, and I was like, oh, I couldn't do a race because I'm not fit and I can't do that race. I remember, Brendan told me, he said, no one cares what you run. Like, no one cares except you. Just remember that. All runners are selfish. They care about themselves first. And then they'll be happy if you're happy you run well, but they don't really care. And when I figured that, I actually realized that was actually the day I switched my Strava, and I was like, anyone can look at my Strava. I wasn't hidden anymore. I was like, look, I don't care what people think anymore. But I think some people do actually naturally. It's probably natural. Like, so you go, oh God, that's a slow, easy run. It's too slow. I'm a faster runner than that. But actually, that's not where you're a good runner, you're a bad runner. It's on race day only. And all those building blocks are only to get you to the race day, probably in your best shape.
Yeah. Excellent. Right, we're going to go to the big day, the big race. So you take your place on the start line. Tell us about the thoughts there and your plan, I suppose.
There's no real plan. We brought in. I was standing by Sergio, and they introduced us all. And I remember I was standing beside Sergio, and I gave him a little nudge because they were introducing him as, I think, a 4-time national champion. And I was kind of going, look at you here. I was kind of having a little flag with him. I was like, Mr. Superstar here beside me. But in good steam now.
Of course.
But yeah, look, when the race started, I kind of thought to myself, I was like, look, I just want to be in that lead Irish pack at 3 miles. I think I've said this a few times, but that was really all I kind of said. I was like, look, I'll get to that lead pack, or to Phoenix Park, and I'm kind of happy. I was like, whatever happens from there will happen, but I'll just try and make sure I don't just fall off straight away and kind of talk myself down or whatever that is. So, like, the first few miles kind of just floated by. We had the lead guys with us for a mile or two, and then they just disappeared off into the sunset. And then there was just a group of, I'd say there was maybe 10 Irish runners, maybe 12, kind of going into the park. You had like all the kind of the past champions there. So you had like Sean, Mick, Gary was there, Sergio was there, and then you had David Mansfield, you had Will Monsell, Tudor. There was probably 10 or 12 guys in that group. And I remember we were going up Chesterfield, and there's a bit of a drag up Chesterfield.
Yeah.
And maybe 6 of them put about 20 meters in me and Sean and a few others. And kind of just, I didn't really react. I just said, look, they'll come back to me. I think they will. I think they're not going to go too far up Chesterfield. It's a long straight. And by the end of Chesterfield, we'd all come back together again, coming into Castleknock. And then kind of the miles just kind of ticked by. Kind of you're constantly thinking about like everyone, right? So seeing people kind of like the crowd was amazing, and you kind of even like going through the park. I've been there, and it's been quiet a few years, but like even in the park, it was manic.
It's great, yeah.
and then you're going up into Castleknock and there's DJs and everything, like just the atmosphere. I kind of wouldn't have minded kind of staying in Castleknock. I remember thinking at the time, I was like,
doing circles of it there.
yeah, I was like, this seems like good fun here. Like,
Yeah. If I jump in there, Martin, for a second, actually, because like I know, look, I've ran Dublin 6 times, I think, and you know, when you go through these zones, as you said, these cheer zones, it's electric, and all of a sudden you drop the pace by a minute or something. How does an elite approach that? Like, is it still very much held together, or do you get excited in those areas, or?
You probably do, but I think you get more excited when you're coming up to the feeding stations. I think that's where, when you're in that group, from experience or from being through it, I think that's when you can see, with about 500 meters to go, people are kind of edging forward and thinking, I'm going to kind of put a bit of a dash in here to make sure I get my bottle. Going through those, going through Castleknock, I don't know if we really sped up, because there's 12 of us.
Yeah.
So you're kind of
Disciplined.
Well, I wouldn't say disciplined, but I'm not running ahead of that guy, and he's not running ahead of me.
Yeah.
Kind of, you're all.
Did you get a song stuck in your head? I remember one year doing Dublin, and I passed one of these, and there was a song that passed, and it was like, that was in my head for the next 5-10 minutes. I was like, oh, gee.
No, I don't think so.
That shows how easy. That shows how easy I'm distracted.
We're running too slow. Just another one though, Martin, on the feed stations, because like, again, not many of us would experience that type of situation. You know, we run to the larger field going for their bottles or whatever. Like, you wouldn't have obviously practiced with that too much either. And again, at speed and in that group, and as you said, taking up positions, like, was that a kind of, how did that fare out?
It actually worked out really well. They didn't have too many bottles on the tables. They were actually really spaced out. So it worked out really well. And I guess I was lucky. I had, for each bottle I actually had my Morton powder in it, and I had a gel tied around it as well. So every time I picked up something, it was two things. And I wasn't taking both of them. So one would, I had a pair of shorts on me, so one would go into the pocket if I wasn't using the gel, and then I'd take the bottle or I'd take the drink. So like I kind of missed maybe every second station anyway myself, because I didn't need it. But no, it was really, really well done, right? So the tables had probably 15, 20 bottles on it, and they were quite spaced out. When you're hitting it at speed, you need to be quick to grab it.
Yeah.
But it wasn't actually that bad.
You didn't have to decorate your bottle like some of the Japanese runners I see there with all fancy diamonds or sparkles on it and things like that. No.
No, I put a few blue and white flags on it. My wife Eileen had done up a few sticks the day before, and Selbridge colours, so that for the club here. But yeah, no. Apart from that, nothing. No balloons or anything else, right? Or fireworks.
Okay. Catch me. So we'll go on to kind of like, we'll go to the juicy end. So from mile 20 onwards, then, you know, you're kind of, everyone is obviously getting that bit tired, and, you know, they looking around at them. So how did they from the last 10k of it go for you then?
I think interesting. The racing actually was actually about mile 14, 15 in Dublin last year. So there's a group of 6 of us, I'd say, going through halfway. And myself and Dave Mansfield were kind of just running beside each other. And I remember at one stage we had a few of the guys behind, and I turned around, we just glanced around, and Will Monsell caught up with us. And I kind of was like, Will, you've been there all the time. Why are you after sprinting to catch us? And he goes, oh, 2 of the guys, Sergio and Mick, have fallen back. I sprinted to catch you. And I kind of was like, we're only at mile 14. Like, I was like, I don't know what's actually happening here, because I don't think we were doing an awful massive speed. So obviously there was a few things going on there with them, obviously in terms of prep or whatever, or race day. But the group dwindled down quite quickly. So from going through halfway with maybe 6 or 7, by mile 17 or mile 15, it was just me and Dave running up by Terranure. We were running up by Bushy Park, and it was just me and him. And Conor Gallagher had broken away earlier. If I remember rightly, much earlier, he broke away, and he was a good distance ahead. So he could have been a minute ahead of us. So that was it, right? So first, second, and third. And I remember thinking, happy days. I was kind of hoping for top 5. Jesus, I might actually get top 3 here. I kind of felt we could get Connor. I thought Dave might have me. That's the way I was kind of probably thinking of it at the time. But as it kind of turned out, probably a mile or two later, so Dave just kind of fell away himself and kind of had a rough like last 7 miles for him, which I've raced with him quite a lot, and normally it's the other way around. I'll have the last 7 miles fairly rough, and he'll just disappear into the sunset. But just look, that the day for him it just wasn't there, unfortunately for him. So going into Clonski, I think it was. Clonski basically. No, not Clonski. About coming out of Terranure, broke away from Dave and just saw Connor and I said, look, I'm on my own here. I'll just run to Connor and see what happens. And I caught him coming at the top of the hill at Milltown. So if you know the race, you run up that Milltown hill and you take the right hand turn towards Clonski.
Yeah.
So I overtook him on the bend. He went a meter wide going around the bend. And I caught him just on the bend, and I said, I'm going tight. I'm going racing.
Formula One style.
Formula One, and I ran tight around the bend and kind of powered on. And he probably had been out on his own for so long at that stage. He was probably a bit spent. And I was kind of fresh after catching him. So there was about 6 miles to go, obviously about there. So you're not even at UCD. You're probably only about mile 20. And like, as I was saying, like that's when you're kind of switching all these cyclists. So you've cyclist 3, lead, third Irish male, second, and now I had a new lead cyclist who was chatting away to me. And then I wouldn't say I ran scared, but I just ran. I kind of just said, look, I'm just going to put my head down and just kind of forget what's actually happening here. And kind of you run up Clonski, and I was just like, get up the top of this, and then around to UCD. And I remember we run towards the flyover at UCD, and the cyclist turned around to me and told me to slow down. And I kind of was like, I'm winning the national title here. I was like, I didn't really understand. I was like, what you? And he goes, there's no one behind you. Like your man, I was at UCD flyover, and he goes, your man hasn't even turned onto the road yet. And I knew that was about 800, 900 meters at least. So I was kind of thinking, all right. And he goes, slow down, just relax. And I was like, okay. And then I just thought, I was like, actually, if I start relaxing here or pulling off, I'll pull my calf or something. So I said, right, I'm just going to keep going. And then over the flyover, so leaving Hafton actually from Selbridge here, got a shout out from him, turned into RTE and saw my wife at the gates, and she hit the roof. And I kind of thought about stopping for a second, but